Hello, this is Pastor Brian Wolfmueller of Table Talk Radio. Hey, pay attention, because you're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I am your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 376. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week, and for those of you who are new, welcome aboard. You've picked a good week to join us, because joining us this week is the pistol-packing padre himself, Pastor John Bennett. Pastor, welcome back. Good to be with you again.
Indeed, it is good to be with you. I always enjoy sitting down and discussing the insanity that our world is stricken with.
It only gets worse day by day.
Yes. Well, you know, it's three times in the Gospel of John, John quotes Jesus as declaring that Satan is the ruler of this world. And some days it seems like Satan's just on a meth-fueled rage. So, just when you thought it couldn't get any worse.
Yep, no doubt. Well, today we're looking at some of, you might call this some of the devil's handiwork. Some self-defense stories from around the country. These are not quite as rip-roaringly hilarious as some of the ones we've looked at in the past, but there are some lessons here that can definitely be learned to help you should you ever face a similar situation, both in terms of the self-defense aspect, but also the ethics involved. Before we get into that, I do want to thank the men and women who make this show possible, the members of the Reformation Gun Club. This week's shout-out goes out to Kenneth from Sugar Land, Texas, Kevin from Marion, Iowa, Scott from Sheridan, Wyoming, Kurt from Rialto, California, Robert from Elk River, Minnesota, Dan from South Lyon, Michigan, Melvin from Holt, Missouri, Calroy from Boron, California, Jim from Rincon, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Rincon, Georgia, and Stephen from Spotsylvania, Virginia. Thank you all so much for your support. Folks, we are listener funded. We don't have any advertising. We don't have any sponsors. We are basically sponsored by the good people that I just mentioned and many more. And if you would like to find out about the benefits of membership, including access to hundreds of hours of exclusive content, lots of cool Armed Lutheran swag, and invitations to our monthly online hangouts, the September version of which is coming up next week. If you would like to find out more and consider joining us, visit reformationgunclub.com. Look for a link in the show notes for this or any of our previous episodes. All right, today, as I said, we're looking at some more self-defense stories from around the nation. Specifically, stories of people who made some dubious or questionable choices regarding self-defense. We're going to look and see what lessons we can learn at their expense. We've done this in the past, and it's always fun and informative. These are not quite so hilarious, but they are definitely informative. This first one comes to us from Fox News back in May. And it's the kind of incident that we've talked about in the past, but it bears repeating whenever this kind of thing comes up. And this one has an additional level of stupid involved. Tennessee man charged with felony reckless endangerment after returning fire on armed auto thieves. That sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think we've reported on several stories like this, and I know Aaron Israel did a few back in his day.
Well, sometimes these end really tragically. Remember the one where a father thought that someone was stealing his truck, and it happened to be his own son?
Yes, he shot through the back of the truck and ended up killing the kid. Yes, I remember that was awful. Well, this one could have turned out in a similar fashion. Tennessee man found himself behind bars. They repeated the headline, sorry. A Shelby County man was notified by his surveillance system at 2 a.m. that several people were outside his home and using burglary tools in an effort to break into a van. After the man walked outside, the thieves fired shots at him as he stood beneath the porch light of his home, according to the outlet. I believe the outlet they're referring to is Fox News. Security video shows the homeowner and the suspects shooting at each other several times. The thieves fled the scene and the man went back into his house, but when police arrived, the man's wife said they began to interrogate him. When they were talking to him, she said, "From what I saw, it was like they were trying to find ways to charge him," the owner's wife told Fox 13. Fox 13 in Memphis. I guess that's the outlet. "That doesn't sound right," she said. "Why would you put pressure on the victim when you should put pressure on the suspects to be found?" So there's an interesting twist in this story. Okay, so the first thing to point out here is, I don't know whether you caught it, but in that first sentence, several people outside his home using tools to break into a van. Not his van, a van. So, first mistake, the guy goes outside in the dark at 2 a.m. to confront people who are breaking into a vehicle that's not even his.
Not smart.
No. Even if it was his vehicle, not smart.
Right.
They immediately started shooting at him, and that forced him to shoot back. Now, why they immediately started shooting at him, it's not clear from the story. It's possible he walked out with a gun, which prompted a response. As we've said on the show many times, anytime you bring a gun to a confrontation, there's always a chance that you're going to have to use it.
Right.
So, big mistake right there. Here's why the deputies were questioning the guy and why they ultimately charged him with felony reckless endangerment. Listen to this. Deputies say that the man told them he could not clearly see what he was shooting at.
Oh.
He admitted firing shots with his eyes closed because he was scared.
Wow.
And he shot at them as they were fleeing.
Yeah, this guy probably shouldn't be a gun owner if he's shooting with his eyes closed because he's in fear. I mean, I get the being afraid part, but
right.
My gosh. That's like, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, so Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back with Will Ferrell, where he's this deputy wildlife marshal. And that reminds, I'll see if I can post the clip to fans of Armed Lutheran Radio from YouTube, because it's worth a watch.
Well, I just don't. So we've got the first issue, which is confronting bad guys who are breaking into a van and not even his own van. That's dumb enough. But he doesn't have a clue how to use the gun he's firing, because he admits he's firing the gun with his eyes closed. He can't see. He admitted he couldn't clearly see what he was shooting at. Now, that part of that may be, oh my goodness, I'm being shot at, I need to fire back.
Right.
So this is a domino effect of the stupid decision to go out and confront them in the first place. But your dumb decision that you to start things off doesn't excuse you from the dumb decisions that come later. I mean, the consequences of that first dumb decision, confronting them at 2 a.m. when they're breaking into someone else's vehicle, is dumb enough, but that then led to them shooting at him, and he had, in fear and panic, I would assume, fires back at them, but fires at them wildly and isn't even opening his eyes while he's doing it. what lessons have we got here? I mean, we've got some both self-defense and some ethical things here, both, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the basic gun safety rules, you don't just throw those out.
Right.
To know what your target is and what is beyond your target. Clearly, this guy didn't know what he was shooting at.
Right.
What would have happened if by the time he got outside, and yes, there were shots that were fired, but what would have happened if, granted, nothing good happens in the dark at 2 a.m.,
Right.
but, what would have happened if, his neighbor was just getting home from the bar and a stray bullet struck and killed an innocent bystander?
Right. What if your neighbor's out walking the dog? What if your neighbor steps out on the porch just to see what's happening, and all of a sudden bullets start flying and hit him?
Right.
What if one of the neighbors had done what was the responsible thing to do, which was to call the police, and the police had rolled up and had rounds flying at them?
Yeah, then you'd be in a lot more trouble than just looking at what will probably be pled down to misdemeanor charges.
Right. And if a police cruiser pulls up in the midst of a gunfight and bullets start flying at them, they have no idea who the good guys and the bad guys are yet. They may well return fire, and this guy and his skivvies might be laying dead on his doorstep. So he's, in addition to the gun safety issue, we mentioned earlier the idea that, or the fact that he's concerned about someone breaking into a van, not his van. And this reminded me when I read it of that story. I can't think of the guy's name. Joe Horn. They use this guy's story in Texas license to carry classes. This is that guy who saw his neighbor's house being robbed, calls the police, standing watching his neighbor's house with a shotgun in his hand, and tells the dispatcher that he's going to go stop them. And despite repeatedly being told not to do that police are on the way, he did anyway. He didn't even know who his neighbors were. And he's upset that these people are in his neighborhood doing this. So he's going to do something about it.
Wow.
And that's an understandable feeling, right? I can't believe this is happening in my neighborhood.
Right.
I can't, but it's
the
not.
The outrage is understandable.
Yes.
The reaction is not. You got, and I hate the saying, but, Wayne LaPierre's, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
Right.
What happens when it's a stupid guy with a gun?
And that's the problem, because this is the kind of thing that gives the rest of us a bad name, a bad rap.
Right. Well, I mean, we did the hypothetical earlier of, somebody walking their dog or coming home from the bar, but it doesn't even take that. A stray bullet can penetrate a window. It could, if it's
right,
hits just drywall. If you've got a FMJ round and it hits drywall, that could penetrate the drywall.
Yep.
So
a lot of the kids that are dying, the actual kids who die in places like Chicago in drive-bys, it's bullets penetrating through walls into private homes.
Right.
So this is dumb and dumber, basically. It's the decision to go out and confront criminals in the dark because they're breaking into a van that's not yours, and then not knowing how to use the gun that you've taken out there to defend someone else's property, not being able to see what you're shooting at.
How many crap situations in life could be avoided if people simply took the time to think a little bit before they acted?
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's just human nature, if it's just plain stupidity, but there are a certain demographic within the Second Amendment supporter world of the guy that thinks that because he got his CCW and he's got his firearm that he's equipped to be hero.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I got my license. I know how to use this.
Right.
And even if they don't, I grew up using, I've heard this, I can't even count how many times. I've grew up with guns. I know how to use them. And then when you need to use it in a situation like this, you make really bad decisions.
Right. Right. You know, for this guy, and this goes for anybody, if there is no immediate threat of bodily harm to yourself or others, you don't have to act.
Right.
Because, now let's face it, if this guy knew, obviously he said he didn't know what he was doing. The fact that he's shooting at them with his eyes closed and he's scared to death, I'm guessing he had no idea they were armed.
Right.
Which is the reality of every situation like this. You have no idea what the other guy's got. Now,
Right.
what this guy should have done is, maybe if he wanted to take some decisive action in the moment, flip your front porch light on and off a couple times.
Right.
Guys doing bad things in the dark, oftentimes that's all it takes to get the buggers to get the heck out of there. But he's got his surveillance video. All he had to do was provide the police with the surveillance video, and these guys might have gotten caught, but he wouldn't be looking at the possibility of jail time and having to hire an attorney.
Yeah. He wouldn't be charged with whatever it is they charged him with. They charged him with felony reckless endangerment.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it, he deserves it.
He does.
But all of our listeners can save yourself a lot of grief by thinking through these situations a little better and not assuming, like you said, I've got the gun, I can do something here.
Right.
All right, this next one does not involve a gun, but it does involve other people's property, and it is sad in many, many ways. CVS employee who fatally knifed shoplifter walks free after posting $100,000 bail. And this is from that bastion of law and order, New York City. The Big Apple
paying pretty good these days.
Yeah, right. The Big Apple CVS employee charged with fatally knifing a serial shoplifter during a fight in a Midtown store was freed from behind bars on Thursday. This was like a month ago. After posting a $100,000 bond, Scotty Eno, age 46, has been in custody at Rikers Island since his arrest over the stabbing of a 50-year-old homeless man. Was fitted with an electronic ankle bracelet before being released under strict conditions. So what happened was this guy, I don't remember how many, they call him a serial shoplifter. The slain homeless man had more than a dozen previous shoplifting arrests to his name and was known to target drugstores in Upper Manhattan, according to records. The employee allegedly told cops he did it in self-defense after he was pummeled by the homeless man without provocation, according to a criminal complaint. I did not stab him over CVS products, he said. I stabbed him over punching me. Look what he did to my face, Eno allegedly told responding officers. Sources said that Eno was hospitalized with contusions to the face after the fatal encounter, and he was later brought to a police precinct and charged. So this, like I said, is sad on so many levels. The biggest being, and we've all seen how major cities around the country are just rife with theft and shoplifting, and stores are closing their retail locations because they can't keep up with all the loss.
Yeah, how many of these stores are getting closed down? And a lot of times it's in poor neighborhoods where people that don't have a vehicle, they walk there to get their necessities, their milk, their eggs, etc.
Yep. They talk about food deserts or food, what is that the term?
Yeah, that's what they're calling them. And this was just, I think it was in San Francisco, where they talked about opening like municipal grocery stores.
That's Chicago.
Oh, Chicago. That's right. Chicago. They're
yeah.
talking about doing that.
So rather than doing anything about rather than spend taxpayer money on, dealing with crime, they're just going to take that money and buy and create city-owned, taxpayer-funded grocery stores.
Yep. And I would almost bet my lunch money that when they lose millions over this, that they'll cut from the law enforcement budget to make up the difference.
Raise people's taxes.
Yep. One or the other, maybe both.
Maybe both. And we are talking about a Democrat-run city. Taxes, they've never seen a tax they didn't like.
Yeah. Although, it's interesting talking about Chicago now. I saw some video where it was like a town hall with the mayor, where you had residents of Chicago asking, was it the mayor? I don't know. They're asking, well, why don't we build a border wall around Illinois? Can't we stop these people from coming into Illinois? So you don't want a wall on the southern border, but you want a wall around your state.
It is funny how the irony is so thick. These people who talk about how racist we are here in Texas and in places like New Mexico and Arizona, where they want to close the borders, and yet when those people start showing up in their neighborhoods, suddenly they're all for walls. Walls around their it's a not in my backyard kind of thing, right? I don't want it in my yard. It's fine if it's in Texas. It's fine if it's in Arizona, but I don't want it here in Chicago. I don't want it in New York.
Well, they've screwed over their people on law enforcement and failure to prosecute crimes, and they're screwing them over by being sanctuary cities as well. It's almost like Democrat policies don't actually work.
Who'd have thunk it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've and they're in a really weird catch-22 too, right? Because they've spent all this time demonizing the police.
Right.
And trying to defund the police, and now crime's out of control. And how do you make a pivot, in 180 degrees and say, we need more police after for 6 years screaming about how terrible the police are?
Right. Well, and sadly, I think that it's going to get worse before they finally wake up, because you'll still hear the politicians in these jurisdictions, whether it's on the city or the state level, that are saying, well, we just need to have more social workers responding to these incidents.
Right. Yeah. This is a failure on so many levels, because you've got the failure of city government to control crime, so that you get store employees put in these awkward situations of, well, do I try to stop him? Do I not? Then you have, in the worst, I don't know what it's not really the worst case. The worst case is this, but in other situations, you have the stores completely closing down and leaving, which puts good people out of work and makes it harder, like you were talking about earlier, for people in those neighborhoods to get the things that they need. And then you've got the failure of our mental health system nationwide, really, that just leaves people out on the streets who really should be locked up and to protect the public. So you end up with this homeless 50-year-old who's, a serial shoplifter. And then you end up with this horrible situation. Now we're basing our analysis on this story, so we can't really speak to the veracity of this guy's claim that he was attacked by a shoplifter without provocation. it could be that he confronted the thief and got punched, and then that seems more likely to me. It seems, although it's possible, like you said, he could have been, blazed out of his mind on meth or just crazy off his meds and just walks in and punches the guy. I suspect there's probably more to this. I wonder if he didn't insert himself into a situation, confronted this guy, the guy's probably out of his mind and punches him, or he tried to escape and they end up in a tussle and the guy punches him. We don't know. Right. But this whole situation is created by the state of law enforcement in many of our major cities that put this guy, whether he made the right decision or not, put this guy in this situation. Yeah. And it's probably not going to work out very well for him, because you've got to have that fear of grave bodily injury or death, right, as justification to use deadly force, right? So,
right, and if in this case, if he hadn't stabbed and killed the guy, but instead had, responded by knocking the guy out, that there is, and you're also realizing that, hey, this is New York City, where most often the victim is not given the benefit of the doubt if they use any type of force. In many of these jurisdictions, if you use a force greater than that which is being inflicted upon you, you're almost guaranteed to be prosecuted.
Right. So he's going to have to prove, since he's killed this guy and he's claiming he did it in self-defense, he's going to have to prove disparity of force.
Yeah.
Because the other guy wasn't armed. He's either got to be a huge dude that he was fighting with and that he feared the guy was going to kill him. Kind of the Trayvon Martin situation, right? Where he had the guy on the ground and was pummeling him, and the guy was afraid he was going to black out and lose control of and the guy was going to take his gun and kill him. So if that's the situation and he's just getting pounded by this big 50-year-old crazy person, and he felt like that was the only way to save his life, that's probably his only defense at this point.
Did it mention the, not that it matters to us, but it certainly would matter in places like New York City, what the race of the homeless guy as well as the employee?
If I recall correctly, they're both black.
Okay. That's why we haven't heard about it on national news.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't fit their preferred narrative, so.
Yeah. And if the evidence shows, there's bound to be cameras in the store, and the point I wanted to get to here was similar to what we were talking about earlier with the guy going out to defend the property of somebody else. If the video in this case, and I'm sure there's store video, that shows that maybe he confronted the guy and he instigated this because he's ticked off that his store is getting robbed, and maybe he knows this guy has stolen from them before and he's pissed because he's doing it again. He's still out on the street. If it shows that he was the aggressor because he's angry about the guy stealing stuff, that's going to be really bad for him.
Right.
Because now it's worse than killing somebody. It's bad enough that you killed somebody to defend yourself. It's bad that you, as we've said many times, to kill somebody in defense of property. And in this case, you're killing somebody to defend somebody else's property, a corporation's property, that they can write off on their taxes. I'm not saying that the fact, you remember when all this stuff started during the post-Ferguson stuff, where they were like, oh, it's no big deal that we burned those stores down because they've got insurance. You remember those?
Yeah.
It's not that. suggesting that, well, it's no big deal because they can write it off. It's not a big deal enough for you to risk your life over.
Right.
I guess the point I'm making.
And this kind of changes my line of thinking, because you've heard of these stories where an employee gets fired because their employer had a corporate policy that you're prohibited from confronting shoplifters. And there's been several cases where an employee confronted a shoplifter and ended up getting fired for it. Perhaps those policies are in place to actually protect the employees.
Right, because if they intervene or they feel they have to as part of their job, and then they get hurt, then they have grounds to sue the company or to file for workman's comp for their injuries.
Granted, I sympathize with the people who got fired. I don't think that's right.
Right.
That's when the supervisor sits down and says, "Hey, this happened. Here's the policy. Here's why. We don't want you getting hurt."
Right.
And we don't want, the other angle of it too is that, let's say you confront a shoplifter, you cause injury or death to the shoplifter, you're doing it while you're on the clock. And if somebody wants to sue for wrongful death, they're not going to go after the employee. They're going to go after the biggest fish, which is the employer.
Mm-hmm. And those cases will inevitably get settled out of court, but that's an expense that the company doesn't really have to feel like they have to pay.
Right.
All right. And this one is another example of a lesson that we've discussed. Is very similar to the first. This is similar to some previous stories that we've talked about. This one takes it a little bit in a different direction, but maybe the best example of what not to do when your car gets stolen. And unsurprisingly, this is from July here in Texas. Man tracks down and kills alleged car thief, gets shot himself in mall gunfire chaos. So, a Texas parking lot turned into a gunfight after a man tracked down his stolen vehicle to a nearby mall where he shot and killed the alleged thief, who pulled out a gun himself and shot the owner. The man and his passenger exited the South Park Mall in San Antonio around 1 p.m. to find their Ford truck missing. The duo tracked down the vehicle to another parking lot at the mall to discover a male and a female sitting in his truck. According to the San Antonio Police Chief William McManus, the owner of the stolen vehicle tracked the vehicle to the parking lot back here behind me. He was giving the press conference out in the middle of the parking lot, obviously. They showed up. They find the vehicle. There are two individuals, a male and a female, in the vehicle, he said. So at this point, they're pretty good, right? They've tracked down where their vehicle is. The smart thing to do is call police, right?
Right.
Because if this guy can find them, I would think San Antonio PD could find them as well.
I would hope so. and this kind of goes back to the little adage from the first scenario. You don't know what the other guy's got.
Right. So, like the first guy, that's not what he did. And this turned out very messy. So the man, whose name was not released, held the suspects at gunpoint. He took it upon himself to essentially make a citizen's arrest here, and directed the driver to sit down by one of the tires while they waited for police to arrive. And then the thief pulled out a handgun from his waistband and shot the owner, who returned fire, striking both suspects and killing the guy on the ground who shot him. So, as Chief McManus says, at some point, the person who stole the vehicle and who is now being held at gunpoint by the owner of the vehicle produced a weapon from his waistband and shoots the owner of the vehicle. That thief was pronounced dead at the scene, according to McManus. The vehicle's owner and the woman were transported to a local hospital where they're listed in stable and critical condition, respectively. Police did not say how the truck was tracked down and described the shooting as a case of self-defense. In photos from the scene, that doesn't matter. Police said the owner of the vehicle had every right to look for his stolen property. Yes, that's absolutely correct. The owner of the vehicle certainly has a right to track down his stolen property, says McManus. But, quote, we would prefer they call the police before taking that into your own hands. But he did what he felt he needed to do, McManus concluded. This could have gone much, much worse.
Right. Well, and there's still a chance he gets prosecuted for shooting the woman.
Right.
They may choose not to prosecute him for shooting and killing the guy who was shooting at him, but he also shot an unarmed individual. So
we assume she's unarmed.
That she may not.
I would assume she was not. It's not mentioned in the story. I would assume had that been the case, they would have mentioned it. This is back to that same situation or same thing we talked about earlier. Anytime you bring a gun to a confrontation, there's a chance you're going to have to use it. And this time he did, and he had to kill somebody over his truck. And I guess, as Chief McManus says, that he did what he felt he needed to do, and I guess that's your right as a Texan, but it's stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. Because obviously he got shot in the process himself.
And yes, and he got shot in the process himself. And now, like you were talking about earlier, he risks the chance that the woman might sue him because she was shot as well.
Yep.
He could have injured other people because this took place apparently in a mall parking lot. So there's not exactly a backstop. And there's lots of concrete for bullets to bounce off of.
Granted, I have never been shot, and I pray that I never know what that feels like. But having known of people who have suffered gunshot wounds, it's not like it is in the movies where they pull the bullet and they sew you back up and you're good to go.
Right.
I can't remember the name of the congressman. Oh, Steve Scalise.
Steve Scalise.
You remember how he was shot? He survived. Mm-hmm. It was so debilitating that it took him well over a year to get back to the point where he was sort of back to normal.
Yeah, he couldn't even walk.
Yes. And so you have there was a recent story not too far from here. On 4th of July, there was a party. I happened to know the guys who own the property. They were renting it out. The guys are members of mine. They were renting it out to some younger kid who had invited a few people over for a party. Well, he made that invitation on Facebook on a public post.
Mm.
And one of the other people who came to this party thought it'd be a good idea to get his hands on some drugs. Called up a dealer. Dealer shows up, turns into a gunfight, and a 19-year-old girl got shot in the spine. She survived. No one died from their injuries, but this guy that's lying in a hospital bed now in Texas, what happens if he never walks again? I mean, we don't know the extent of his injuries, but is the juice worth the squeeze, as the saying goes?
Yeah. Was all of this pain and the medical bills and the insurance and all that and the potential for lawsuits worth what you got out of it, which was, I assume, you got your truck back filled with bullet holes.
Yeah. Yeah. Have fun explaining that to the insurance company.
Right. So now you've got car repair expenses, body work to do.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and the consequences are endless. There's a lot of cases where a situation like this, your employer finds out about it and you don't have a job anymore.
Right. Right. Because it speaks to your
it speaks to your character.
To your character.
And your lack of judgment.
Yes. That's the word I was looking for. I could not think of the word judgment. Yes. Do I want to employ this guy anymore, knowing that he's kind of a hothead and he might he might go out and shoot somebody.
Yeah.
And again, it's not over a life and death situation. It's not because your life is threatened. It's because you're mad because the guy took your truck. And this is where you got to kind of put your ego in check when it comes to these things. It seems like there's a lot of these stories where the ego gets involved with, I can't believe this guy, he's dissed me by stealing my truck. How dare he? And so I'm going to show him. And instead of figure out where they were, figuring out, giving a description to the police and saying, hey, they're sitting here right now, come and get them. He decides that the thing to do, as the police chief said, he did what he felt he needed to do, and he felt he needed to actually perform a guns out citizen's arrest and get in a gunfight in a mall parking lot. It's just epic levels of dumb.
Yeah. He's dang lucky that this happened in San Antonio, Texas, not in, Colorado Springs or, take any of these blue to purplish areas where they make an example of you if you try to take the law into your own hand.
Or even Austin, Texas.
In
or
Austin.
Dallas, Texas, or in
Yes.
Houston. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep, exactly. Well, Pastor, thank you so much for taking the time. I really do appreciate it. It's always fun to get together, and we should do this again soon.
It is. I enjoyed it.
All right, folks, if you have any questions, any comments, any thoughts, any complaints, if you have a topic that you would like to hear us discuss in a future episode, please visit our feedback page, armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave us a message. We would love to hear from you and respond in a future episode. Next week, folks, will be our September online hangout for 2023. So be sure to check that out. If you are a member of the Gun Club, we look forward to seeing you. If not, sign up today. Go visit reformationgunclub.com and sign up, and you'll get an invite to come and hang out with the pastor and myself and a bunch of other cool people who hang out with us every month. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.